I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. In a few months from now, if you look at the fluttering flags in front of homes on college football Saturdays in Montgomery County, Maryland, you will note the strong presence of the Nittany Lion, the Penn State University mascot. Maryland and particularly Montgomery County are importers of people, of workers, and especially of teachers. Most domestic migration to Montgomery comes via Washington, D.C., but Pennsylvania is a big state of origin. For one, the Quaker state has double our population and generally a lower wage rate. The difference between Pennsylvania and the Washington suburbs is even larger. I bring this up to say that we should care about what's happening in Pennsylvania. The last few years, Penn State, like other big land-grant universities, has been struggling with its mission, cost, and delivery approaches. 2 years ago, Penn State began a reorganization effort that culminated this year in a plan to close roughly half its satellite campuses: Du Bois, Fayette, Mont Alto, New Kensington, Shenango, Wilkes-Barre, and York. Penn State is the second regional public university after West Virginia to undergo painful reorganization. With one big difference: Penn State's flagship location at University Park in the town of State College, Pennsylvania, is growing, making this a consolidation story rather than West Virginia's seemingly ideological retrenchment. Though I imagine at the Penn State campuses that are closing, it feels different. Post-World War II, land-grant universities expanded with the GI Bill, and then again because of federal investment in higher education as part of the Cold War effort and the adoption of civil rights and equal opportunity laws. The expansion of higher education continued unabated from the 1970s to 2010, when there were 21 million students enrolled in U.S. universities. Since then, with the 2000 recession effects, changing demography, and public criticism of higher education, college enrollment numbers have been declining. The biggest criticism has been the cost of college attendance, though truth be told, public universities have generally held the line on in-state tuition since about 2010. The second major criticism of higher education is that they are not meeting the workforce demands of the contemporary economy. This has been a perennial question in higher education. Harvard College, of yore, struggled between its mission of educating preachers and including engineering curriculum. Most storied American schools have faced similar dilemmas. This criticism has had the Gucci effect, where a handbag any other manufacturer prices at $80 to $100 is sold by luxury brands for $1,500, taking the average price of handbags even higher. But it does explain Penn State's decision to consolidate at University Park while closing its satellite campuses, even though tuition at University Park is higher than at satellite campuses. Even though there has been a backlash on college costs, families and students prefer to pay more for the greater prestige of attending a higher reputation school, which may or may not include better education. In the case of satellite campuses, the better school is often the school's main campus itself. In the mid-2010s, the American Political Science Association reported that political science majors in the U.S. were not just declining, but falling up, with students preferring prestige even with the higher tuition. This has left satellite campuses, which I see as the democratizing edge of American higher education, vulnerable to lower enrollment, but also to the demand to focus on technical education focused directly on workforce development. Let civics, sociology, and the humanities be the preserve of those going to better schools. This issue is close to me. I teach for UMBC at the universities at Shady Grove, which is a higher education center managed by the University System of Maryland, similar to Penn State's many satellite campuses. It is not surprising that Penn State's faculty recently voted to unionize. And after years of trying, University System of Maryland faculty have successfully lobbied the General Assembly to pass laws to allow partial faculty unionization. Regular faculty in Maryland schools still cannot unionize. Penn State, they can now. To learn more from Penn State's experience, I talked with Randy Newnham, a political science professor and union organizer at the university's satellite campus at Berks, Pennsylvania, which is going to remain open. Stay with us. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Baltimore-based musician Seth Kibel's new album, Clarinet Without A Net. Maximilian Jacobs on violin, Erin Murphy Snedecor on cello, R.N. Buckheister, dobro, acoustic guitar and mandolin, Tom Holtz, helicon, Rowan Corbett, percussion, and Seth Kibel himself on the clarinet. Jeff Gruber at Blue House Productions in Silver Spring recorded, mixed, and mastered the album. Randy Newnham, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Penn State University, your employer, has been going through reorganization. They've decided to close 7 what's called Commonwealth campuses, and there's a process that is unfolding to close programs. What is this reorganization about?
We do have a very big network of campuses across the state, which a lot of people don't know about. I think a lot of people who know Penn State, they know the football team and they know Joe Paterno, and that's University Park, the main campus of the system. That is 40,000 plus undergraduates at that main campus, and then there's another 40,000 or so scattered across the state, all the way from Penn State Behrend up in Erie down to Penn State Abington and Ogontz near Philadelphia. They initially proposed closing up to 12 of the campuses. Some of them were spared. It depended on factors such as what other higher ed options are there in the area. I know we have a small campus near us in Schuylkill County, which is kind of the West Virginia of Pennsylvania, former coal mining area, and they have no other higher ed in their county. They don't even have a community college. So that's one reason that they were spared. But it does seem arbitrary, and the final decision obviously angered a lot of people at those campuses, but also the communities, because a lot of these small isolated communities really relied on that Penn State campus for education for their students, obviously, but also for jobs. And it seems that several of the campuses closing are in particularly economically distressed parts of the state, which is a real shame because they really don't need to be kicked when they're down. For example, there were, I think, 4 campuses outside of Pittsburgh. 2 or 3 of them are closing. And that's a real blow for that area because it's been especially Western PA that's been lagging behind.
How many students are there in these campuses?
It varies quite a bit. The smallest ones are only about 700 at a campus. And then we are at about 1,600 or something. We were higher. We almost reached 3,000 at one point. Harrisburg is around 5,000. Behrend is maybe 6,000. That's the one in Erie. I think that's the largest of the non-UP locations. So yes, they're not terribly big, but of course, there are a lot of small campuses out there. And Penn State thought they had a pretty viable model for the small campuses. We were largely doing what we call 2+2. Most of the students at our campuses were taking the first 2 years here, which lets them live at home, perhaps, if they're local students, save a lot of money. Not being so far from home is also easier for people in the first couple years of college. Of course, we offer smaller class sizes, which is also a big advantage. So we thought we really had some good selling points. And then if they wanted to, they could continue up to University Park for the final 2 years and get a taste of the large campus life. So that was the model for a lot of the students.
These campuses are a pipeline to University Park.
For a lot of the students, yeah. And they started in the late 1990s, allowing us to offer our own 4-year degrees. We now are about half and half. I'd say about half of our students stay for all 4 years, and the other half still take that 2+2 option. Penn State was actually promoting that. Penn State was encouraging the small campuses to hire more faculty and expand. The idea was that the central administration didn't really want the main campus to get too big because that's already 40,000 plus. State College is becoming quite a metropolis. The local people of State College didn't really want it to get any bigger. But apparently the problem was that a decent number of the students just want to get to UP. That's where the football is, that's where the fraternities are, the big parties, the excitement. Many of us think that's where Penn State spends too much of its money. And then they turn around and wonder why so many students are attracted to go there. So the problem is we started getting a fair number of students that just said, I'm not going to go to Penn State if you're not going to admit me directly to the main campus. I'm not going to accept doing the 2+2. I'm just going to go to University of Maryland or someplace completely different. And Penn State felt they were losing students.
The campus at Berks, where you work, used to be almost 3,000. Now you're at 1,600. And you think the main reason why you've lost students is because students prefer now to go to University Park. And that's what's driving declining enrollments at the satellite campuses?
That's part of it. Penn State has now made the situation for the small campuses worse because they have felt, well, the students are voting with their feet. We have no choice but to go with what the customer wants. So they've now decided to increase the size of University Park. They're adding another, I'm not sure, 7,000, 10,000 students to University Park. And then that in turn further hurts the small campuses. But I guess they felt they had to do that because that's what the students wanted. So it's a kind of an abrupt shift in plan that affects us quite a bit.
What do you think changed? These campuses have been around since the 1990s. They were established, they were functioning, they even got the ability to issue 4-year degrees.
Right.
And now you go, well, students don't want it, and it seems students don't. But what happened?
I think a lot of it is the overall decline in 18-year-olds. And so they are more sought after and they can now get more what they want. I think in the past, it was more common for students to say, oh, well, I got into Penn State. That's good enough. I'm okay with doing a 2+2 plan. But now they're getting accepted at more different schools. People are also applying to a lot more schools now. You've probably seen that as well, that with electronic applications and everything, it's gotten much easier for students to apply to 20 different schools. And then they don't feel that they have to take the offer that the school gives them.
There are countervailing factors. Out-of-state tuition is completely out of control. If a Pennsylvania family wants to send their kid to Maryland, or a Maryland family wants to send their kid to Penn State, it's prohibitive. Yes, they're applying. The Common App allows, more applications. And then a lot of universities are test optional. So there is, more people are applying as a consequence of that. But there is a sorting that happens at the decision time, right? It's not
Right.
like everybody is going to go to University Park. The American Political Science Association had a report going back, I think, in 2013, 2014, that said that at least in political science, students seem to be falling up. That is, going to more named institutions, and everybody is affected. So, satellite campuses, they fall on main campus, and then from Penn State, they're probably applying to University of Pennsylvania, and University of Pennsylvania people are applying to Harvard, right? So it's like everybody is falling up, especially in, it seems, in political science. Do you think, that kind of dynamic is in play? Are the economics of these satellite campuses changing such that, they are not supportable anymore?
I think that it's true that a lot of students are maybe getting into schools that they wouldn't have in the past because there's fewer students. Part of it is also, I think, that more and more accelerating over the last 20 or 30 years, parents are letting the students make the choice of where to go. And so the students gravitate towards something that sounds more prestigious, or also maybe something that sounds more fun. I can't tell you how many students I talk to who are like, well, I'm going to this school because my girlfriend's there, or I'm going to this school because of the football program, because I've heard there's a lot of parties and, that kind of thing. And I feel
But
like
those
in
were
the
variables
past,
that existed before, right?
that's always existed to some extent, but I feel like now it's more common for parents to just say, fine, whatever you want, and even to ignore the financial incentives more than you might think, because, if the student's not paying for the college, what do they care? And in a lot of families, it is mom and dad paying for it. Penn State tried to do some of that, and I think it had some effect. We have different tuition at the different locations. University Park is more expensive than the smaller campuses, and that gap has been slowly widening over the last 20 years because Penn State is trying to incentivize people to go to the smaller campuses. And that works for some families, but not like we're failing entirely. I still would say at least half of our students really do want to be here, and they do buy into the fact that it's cheaper and that they get smaller classes and more personal attention. None of our classes are taught by teaching assistants. I know professors at University Park who will just put on their syllabus, I'm not going to write a letter of reference for any of you, because they're teaching 700 students. I've never had a class of more than like 50.
What are the other aspects of this reorganization?
They want to look at low-performing programs and consider closing some of those. They had an outside report on that as well, and they came up with metrics for why you would want to close a program, some of which are sort of obvious, like low graduation numbers, low numbers in the program, but they were also looking at things like their perception of the job market. So they tried to say, well, how many people does the state of Pennsylvania need in global studies? For some of those degrees, it's very hard to get good numbers for that because, of course, that's not usually a job title. I'm not looking to hire people to be a global studies person. That could go into a lot of different jobs. Some of us sort of felt the numbers were a little bit inaccurate, was only looking at Pennsylvania. And say in a field like mine, if you're doing something related to international studies, you are kind of thinking, well, a lot of these people are probably going to go to New York or Washington and not necessarily be in Pennsylvania. So we aren't only satisfying the Pennsylvania job market, but that was how it was set up. So now, if you're looking for hiring mechanical engineers, that might be something that there's more likely to be a job description that says mechanical engineer. And so you can get a little better handle. Based on those numbers, they did come up with a list of programs that they felt were absolutely secure because they were large enough and strong enough. And then a list of programs that were questionable that should be considered for what should we do with that program.
Governor Shapiro, as Governor Moore in Maryland, are Democrats. These decisions are at the state level. They are not at the federal level. So I'm a little bit
Right.
surprised by the acquiescence of Democratic political leadership.
Penn State has a really interesting board of trustees because it's not simply a state institution. It's not simply a private institution. It's between. Penn State Board of Trustees is 1/3 appointed by the governor, 1/3 elected by the alumni, and 1/3 appointed by business, professional, and agricultural societies in the state of Pennsylvania.
Huh.
It's considered a state-related institution, not a state institution. Speaking of Governor Shapiro, what surprised some of us was when they did the Board of Trustees vote on closing the Commonwealth campuses, he directed the state officials who were on the board, and as I said, it's 1/3 state appointed, he directed them to abstain.
Why do you think he wanted abstention rather than?
Maybe he did buy Penn State's argument that some of these campuses just weren't really viable anymore, that they were just not bringing in the numbers of students, that they were a consistent budget drain, and that was hurting the whole system. But that did throw under the bus some of these local communities who were very upset about it. So that is not just a bad thing for those communities, but it's also worrying to me politically. Penn State has to go to the state legislature to ask for funding. And if you've ticked off half the communities in the state, then those people are not going to want to vote for your funding, regardless of party.
What numbers are we talking about in terms of budget?
Penn State only gets about 10 or 15% of its budget from the state. I think we get maybe $300 million a year from the state, and our overall budget is several billion. But it is important money. They try to direct it especially toward undergraduate instruction. So that's, of course, what a lot of us value. It has been pretty frozen for the last 15 or more years, where we have tended to see the dollar amount remain fairly constant, which means it's slowly eroding over time with inflation.
Where does the rest of the money come from?
Tuition is, of course, a big chunk, and we do have fairly high tuition for a state university, I think. And a lot of it has been from research funding. That's been another big chunk. We get a good amount of donations too, but that's probably a couple $100 million a year. I think we get some help in other ways because a lot of the students are paying their tuition partly through state taxes. We have Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, FIA, which is a big help for a lot of the poorer students, or they're on some kind of federal grant or something. So we are kind of being supported on the tuition side as well. Although that comes with pressure too, because of course the governor, the legislature, all of those people keep saying, don't raise your tuition.
Speak a little bit about how the reorganization is affecting faculty roles, departments, academic governance.
One of the big issues has been, well, if you close a campus, and then we're also going to be looking at closing programs, what happens to all the people who are working there? And Penn State so far has committed to try to place tenured faculty in other positions. Although even that has been a very messy process. One of my colleagues who's involved with the union at the New Kensington campus, and apparently they came to him just a few weeks ago and said, we think we have a possible job for you at another campus. You have 3 days to decide, and that's it. And so he had to decide about uprooting his family. And of course, his wife was at a local job and his kids and everything, and give Penn State a quick answer. Or he wasn't going to get placed. But then you've also got all of the non-tenured faculty who they don't seem to have a commitment to, who are just going to be out of a job. And so, of course, some of them are trying to find other locations. And Penn State did say, we will give preference to people from the closing campuses when jobs open up at the other campuses, but not that many jobs are opening up. So one of the things I've advocated for, and maybe the union will advocate for this in the fall when we start negotiating with Penn State, is to say, hey, could Central Penn State administration help to subsidize the salaries of these professors if another college will take them. Like if my Penn State Berks location could take a couple extra faculty and rescue them, could Penn State pay half of their salary for 5 years or something to incentivize us? Because if you have to pay the whole salary out of just your local resources, and most of the, even University Park itself, but most of the campuses are not real eager to hire a lot of people.
So is it the case that most of the campuses are self-contained cost units, that they are kind of self-sustaining on tuition, and because that is out of whack, then and that's what's sort of propelling?
The budget model has been a problem, yeah. But they do seem to expect the campuses to be largely self-supporting, and the campuses are generating overhead for the central as well. So, we have to, part of our budget, I think, goes to things like the university libraries and other things that are central. We often feel that we are not really being treated fairly at the smaller campuses. I'm sure they would disagree at University Park. At University Park, I think they think they're carrying us. One of the big motivations for unionization is to really get a look at these finances and see what the details are, how these models work, because we have not been able to really see what's going on behind the curtain.
What is the state of shared governance at Penn State at this moment, and has been? I would imagine that kind of budget inquiry is entirely possible from the faculty senate.
You would think. I haven't been on the faculty senate, but as I understand it, they do get kind of general reports. They don't necessarily get all the details. The big budget decisions are the board of trustees, so the faculty does not have a real say there.
As a consequence, the faculty at Penn State have voted now 3-1 for unionization. Is it your hope that the new union will be able to effectively redirect Penn State policy? How would that happen?
We're going to try to go into bargaining with Penn State this fall already, with a positive attitude that we should be focusing not just on getting things for the faculty, but on getting things for the whole learning system. And we're also hoping that we can help the university with their problems with the state legislature. Now, we're not going to be able to reverse the campus closures or probably the program closures. The administration is still the administration, and they ultimately will make a lot of these decisions. For those areas, what we're focusing on is what's called impact bargaining. The action is going to go through, but the question is, what do we do about people's jobs? What do we do about the timetable for the changes taking place? How do the changes take place? How are students impacted, and so on?
On the contract bargaining side, are you hoping for increased salaries even as the university cuts campuses and programs?
We're still deciding what we want to bargain on. Within the next week or two, we're hoping to get out a big survey for the faculty talking about what would you like to see. At least some of the more senior faculty like myself, we're not that dissatisfied with our salaries. It's more a matter of trying to make sure we get things in writing, because as you know, you may have decent benefits now, you may have a decent salary now, but if you're at a totally at-will employer situation, you don't have a contract. So they could come back and say, gee, we want you to teach more classes next year, or gee, we want you to take a pay cut. So we would like to have positive things locked in that we do have. And personally, I'm more concerned with the lower paid faculty. We have rather poor salaries for our adjuncts. Some of them are really making McDonald's wages for teaching classes. Some of our non-tenured full-time faculty also are very low paid. One of the things that Pitt was able to get in its contract that I think was a good idea was they were able to get a floor. I think they actually got a $60,000 floor, which sounded pretty generous.
Are you guys right now at-will employees? What level of tenure protection?
Tenure protection, I think, is the standard that you will have some kind of a job guarantee unless there's exigent circumstances like a program is cut. So if they cut your whole department, then that can lead to tenured faculty being cut. or if there's exigent budget circumstances where the overall university budget gets too bad, tenure is not as solid as people think it is. And we're finding that out with both our campus closures and our program closures. So, we would like to have some of this stuff written in a contract where it's more formal. Another example is benefits. For example, Penn State has a pretty good benefit package. And for years, they have told us that the deal is that they will pay 80% and we pay 20%. But that is just an arbitrary figure that they plucked out of the air, and they could turn around next year and say, well, benefits are too expensive now, we're only going to pay 70%.
Are you allowed to strike as a union?
I think we are, yeah. There are other unions at Penn State, so I would have to look at their history. We have had our service staff unionized for a long time with the Teamsters.
Smaller campuses of Penn State have been economic anchors in some of the communities that they are in. And so there is this chicken and egg problem. Do you invest more in a particularly depressed community via this instrument of a Penn State campus, even if it's not at this time attracting students, or do you simply pull out? Now that you're unionized, how would you like that tension resolved?
We are interested in the financial well-being of Penn State, too. Ultimately, we don't want them to be making bad investments. We do kind of feel that they've been making some bad investments. As you may know, we are spending $700 million to renovate our football stadium over these couple of years. And that is supposed to be paid for entirely by football tickets, by athletic revenue, but they had to take out almost $1 billion worth, I think, of bonds to pay for all of our sports facilities, and the Board of Trustees had to guarantee them. If any of you in Maryland would like to come up to Penn State games and pay for tickets, we'd be very happy to have you. They've also invested a lot of money in very big, fancy facilities at University Park. We sort of feel that every building up there is another Taj Mahal. But then, of course, if you put all the money into that campus, then that's putting all your eggs in one basket, and it does hurt the enrollments at the smaller campuses.
Randy Newnham, thank you for taking the time to explain the travails at Penn State. I hope you'll come back as you know more.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Baltimore-based musician Seth Kibel's new album, Clarinet Without A Net. Maximilian Jacobs on violin, Erin Murphy Snedecor on cello, R.N. Buckheister, dobro, acoustic guitar and mandolin, Tom Holtz, helicon, Rowan Corbett, percussion, and Seth Kibel himself on the clarinet. Jeff Gruber at Blue House Productions in Silver Spring recorded, mixed, and mastered the album. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.